What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. We're talking about the Dragic trade rumors, and obviously we've heard a lot about a bunch of different teams, but today we're really going to be focusing on 5 potential Dragic trades to send him to a contender. And there's only 2 rules for a trade to be considered. By the way, they might be a bit noisy. I'm out here in cottage country, but I thought I'd bring you some content anyway. Number 1, he has to go to a contending team, right? A team he's going to be happy to play for. Otherwise, the trade doesn't make sense. And you have to match salaries to within 80% to make the cap rules. That's it. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So my first trade is with a team that, let's just go ahead and say it. The Dallas Mavericks have been a team that's rumored to be interested in Goran Dragic. They obviously need a veteran point guard as they want to win right now. We know Porzingis, might need a little bit of leadership, a guy who can help him in the pick and roll on top of Doncic. So I think Dragic would be a natural fit there in that backcourt, a guy who can have the ball in his hands and operate when Doncic needs rest as well. So in this trade scenario, the Mavs would get Goran Dragic, like I said, vet point guard, perfect fit for them, a guy who helps them win right now. And then the Raptors would get a package back in return that, number 1, meets the salary requirements, and number 2, gives them a little bit of juice, something back that's actually kind of worth it for them. So Dwight Powell, Trey Burke, and Moses Brown is the package in return. There aren't really a lot of good contracts to make this work unless you're to trade Kleber, but I think if you got Powell and Kleber back, it's kind of a weird package when you get 2 bigger guys. That's also a potential option for Toronto, but I think this is an interesting one because the Raptors will get Powell, Canadian guy, 30 years old, Trey Burke, another guy, vet point guard, come off the bench. And then Moses Brown is a young, interesting piece that Toronto could use in the future as another guy who they put in their center rotation. And someone who does have promise. He's super young, super athletic. And he's also humongous, too. So I think he would be a really good fit in Toronto. And for Toronto, that'd be a huge win to get something back for Dragic when he was part of that Lowry trade for the sign-and-trade purposes of the contract. So number 1, Dallas Mavericks, that's the package. Let me know in the comments what you think of trade number 1. Trade number 2 is with the Boston Celtics. And for the Boston Celtics, they had a weird year last season, but there's no question that there was a lot of pressure on them to start contending and competing now. You've got Jason Tatum in his prime, who is a superstar, obviously. You've got Jaylen Brown in that backcourt as well. The way that Kemba left, they brought in Al Horford. Clearly, there was some kind of locker room cancer there. And so for them, I think they want to win and put it all together this year. And the best way to do that is to fill their biggest void, which is not having a veteran point guard or a guard in general to help facilitate that offense, get Tatum the ball, get Brown the ball, and then also generate his own offense as well. So Dragic, natural fit there. Obviously, they want to compete now, so it makes sense for them to get him versus, going to Philly or him going to a team they're trying to compete with a little bit. And I don't think they'll have to give up too much in return as well. So it's a good move for Brad Stevens to make because he's the type of guy that might be a bit conservative. But the trade is essentially the Celtics get Goran Dragic, and in return the Raptors get Josh Richardson, Chris Dunn. I saw this online. I think it was NBA Analysis Network, something like that. I thought this was an interesting trade. Obviously, the salary works. Chris Dunn, both these guys are 27, right? Chris Dunn, Josh Richardson. Richardson averaged 17 points per game back in 2019. He shot the ball around 36%. Since then, he's kind of dipped. Obviously, played in Dallas, played in Philly, kind of moved around a bit. But he's a guy that, if he can put it together, can actually be a really interesting player. And I think this is the better return than trade number 1 because Josh Richardson has a higher ceiling than any guy, than Moses Brown, most likely, Powell, Burke. And I still think Josh Richardson's young enough to make the incentive worth it for them. And then Chris Dunn is a defensive guard, more just put in to match the salary. But I think that he's had 2 decent years in his career where he shot over 30% from 3. That's the one thing that's holding both these guys back is their ability to shoot, because on defensive side of the ball, they're good. And offensively, they need to rely on something more than just their athleticism. So that's the second trade. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of that one. Trade number 3 is an interesting one. I haven't really heard anyone talk about it, and it's with the Indiana Pacers. For them, we obviously know that everything that's going on in their front court doesn't really work. They haven't been able to put it together. When you look at Miles Turner next to Domantas Sabonis, that just doesn't really work. You need to play Sabonis at the 5. Obviously, he can't shoot. Turner has tried to kind of put that together. He does shoot decently, but I just don't think this fit is going to work anymore. So the trade is simply Miles Turner for Goran Dragic. Their salaries are basically the same. The difference is you've got a 2-year commitment for Miles Turner, and Dragic is a 1-year rental. So for Indiana, this might be just a one-time shot in the dark, and could end up not panning out for them. You could end up walking for nothing, but I do think it adds an interesting wrinkle when you look at their current situation. You've got Malcolm Brogdon, and when healthy, he's obviously a really good point guard. You got some other good veteran players like Jeremy Lamb, a few others off the bench there that are interesting. Then you've got Sabonis, you've got Karis LeVert. So for them, they've got to sort of pick a direction. And if they trade Miles Turner, maybe that direction is we want to win right now, be a little more competitive. They're a smaller market. They can obviously flip Dragic later if they need to, in terms of either trading him next season via sign and trade or something like that, give him a good contract. Dragic seems the kind of guy that would want to get his money. So I think that for the Pacers, you can just flip him and try and be better this season. And in return, the Raptors get Miles Turner, a 25-year-old young center with promise, a guy with two-way ability, averaged almost 3.5 blocks per game. Only issue, he doesn't really stay healthy. So for Toronto, they've got to figure out what they're going to do with his health, how they're going to invest in him, because 2 years at $18 million apiece is a lot of money for a guy that could end up only playing 45 games in the season. So for Toronto, like I said, they got to figure out how they're going to approach this, if they trust him, if they think he's going to be the type of player that they could see playing long term. For me, I really like him as a player. I do like Precious Achiuwa. I like Khem Birch, but I think Miles Turner does have a high ceiling as well as a type of player, especially at his age, who can bring a lot of value for Toronto, especially because he can stretch the floor. So I think it's interesting when you have Scotty Barnes, a guy who's still trying to put that all together. Pascal Siakam had a good season, now a bad season shooting. Who knows what we're going to get from him? I think adding a guy like Miles Turner who can stretch the floor better than Khem Birch and Precious would be kind of interesting to see with Toronto's rotation. But saying that, we already know Khem Birch and Precious can kind of do that a little bit. So Miles Turner might be a redundant piece to add for Toronto, but I still think it's interesting. Let me know in the comments what you think of this trade. This next trade is really interesting to me because we don't really know the direction that this team is going to go in this offseason, starting in the next season, and it's still deep into August right now, so we don't really know what's happening, but Portland has decisions to make. They got bounced in the first round by Denver without Jamal Murray, so they've got a lot of issues that they have to resolve. One of those being what they're going to do with Dame Lillard. Do they trade him? Do they rebuild? Or do they keep going and try to win now? There's obviously two sides to this. For Portland, a smaller market, maybe trying to contend for a few more years is worth it for the fans. But on the other side of things, it could be futile because maybe winning a title with Dame as your number one guy isn't possible. But let's try and address some issues around Dame and assume he's not the problem. And we're also going to keep CJ. We're going to keep Nurkic. But what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade their veteran point guard spot by adding Goran Dragic. This makes a lot of sense to me. Obviously, you get a guy who can come off the bench and produce for them. Defensively, he's not going to add too much per se. He is a decent defender, but I think that Portland will have other moves to make in terms of bolstering up their front court, adding guys who can actually defend. We saw them add Robert Covington. That really didn't do much for them. We saw them add Derrick Jones Jr. That didn't do much for them last year, so they've still got to figure that stuff out. Maybe they use Nurkic and try and find a way to wiggle him and a few other assets to get some other guys, pick up some guys in free agency, and really bolster up that front court, like I said. But I think when you add a vet point guard who can come off the bench, you'll help them offensively, especially in the clutch. I think Dragic can be out there for Portland, right? And I think he'll be able to defend enough to make the other team respect him. So in my mind, Dragic for Robert Covington and Anthony Simons is a pretty simple trade. I don't know if Portland will want to give up Anthony Simons. I think this might be a bit too much ask for Toronto because Anthony Simons, 22 years old, super athletic, won the dunk contest, averaged 8 points per game. Did he win the dunk contest? I don't remember, but he was in the dunk contest, averaged 8 points per game last year, and was a very solid player for them in like the 15 to 20 minutes he played a game. But I'm just not sure if long term he's the guy that they're going to be building around. Maybe they keep him if their direction is to rebuild. Obviously, this trade makes no sense, but I'm assuming they want to keep contending with Dame. They add that to their backcourt. Maybe they can even try and wiggle out a frontcourt player from Toronto. Maybe add another guy to match salary. Maybe the Raptors give them back Chris Boucher to put in their frontcourt, a guy who can defend at the forward position, a guy who can score a little bit, but I'm not going to get too much into that. This is my first draft for this trade. Let me know what you think of this Portland trade in the comments below. You guys are in the YouTube exclusives now, including the last trade. These last two were not posted on Instagram, so If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Make sure to subscribe, like the video. Why not support us? Trying to make some money here, trying to do this full time for you guys. The final trade is the LA Clippers. And for the LA Clippers, they need a point guard really badly. We saw them try to get Kyle Lowry. They were in the talks, but they didn't really have any assets. So this trade actually is a little more interesting because they obviously acquired Eric Bledsoe. So the trade would be Bledsoe for Dragic, 1-for-1. Bledsoe's on a 2-year deal, same amount of money, $18 million. And Dragic is a better fit for them to win now, right? He can shoot, he can run the offense, and he can play decent enough defense on a team that's already an elite defensive team. So I think his fit there would be natural. And I think that he would get the chance to win now. So I think he would be happy. He'd be playing in LA with Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, obviously when Kawhi gets back. So I think that's an interesting fit for them. On the other side for Toronto, you get a guy who actually wants to be there, right? You get Eric Bledsoe for 2 years. You could flip him later if you need to. But you get a guy who's defensive. He can drive to the paint. We obviously know his limitations as a shooter, especially in the playoffs, right? The Raptors sagged off him and let him shoot all day, and he bricked it all day. But you know what? Despite that, for Toronto, you get a veteran guard who can come off the bench, play good defense, and attack the paint. I like that fit for Toronto. And like I said, the big thing is that you got a guy that wants to be in Toronto, a guy that wants to play with the team. That's enough for me to say, why not just pull the trigger and get Dragic out of there, get a guy like Bledsoe. I think the fit is a win-win. And this is actually a really realistic trade because I think the Clippers would be down. I think the Raptors would be down for this trade. So you can lock this in as a trade that could actually realistically happen. Whereas some of these, I got my paper here. Some of these might not be super realistic per se. Like the Mavericks trade, I could see that happening. The Celtics trade, I could see that happening. But the Pacers and the Portland trades, I kind of made those up. I'm not really sure whether or not those would happen. It really is team dependent on what they want to do this year. Especially the Indiana one, I just don't see that really happening for them. I just think they're kind of in mediocrity and don't really think adding Dragic makes much sense. For Portland, maybe it does, but getting Anthony Simons might be a little much. But let me know if you like this Clippers trade. Let me know what trade's your favorite, your least favorite, and also throw in your trade predictions for Goran Dragic. Once again, thanks for listening, guys, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out.